New Landings Job Chat is brought to you in part by the Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future, and by the EBS Group with an unparalleled background in Oracle solutions and services.
Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes accidental. But in effect, you're in the same situation. You're in a difficult interview situation. What do you do now? You'll find out today on Job Chat. My name is Hector Silva. I'm your host. Our guest today is Kathryn Lorenzen. Kathryn has recruited, screened, and placed hundreds of people in jobs, coached hundreds more in their job searches, and made dozens of presentations on career development. She spent the last 14 years at LandaJob Advertising and Marketing Talent, and she also worked almost 20 years in advertising agent account management at Bernstein Reen, Valentine Radford, and several other creative agencies in the Southeast and Midwest. Kathryn earned her coaching credential from the National Career Development Association, and she served as president of the Kansas City chapter of the Association of Career Professionals International. Her newest hobby is serving as a creativity coach to fiction writers through the Creativity Coaching Association. Welcome, Kathryn.
Thank you, Hector. I'm glad to be here.
Let's start off with just a simple question.
Okay.
What do we mean by a difficult interview situation?
A difficult interview situation, I think, is one in which the interviewer is making the candidate uncomfortable. And that can be a natural situation by virtue of the interviewer's personality, or it can be artificial in some way. But the result is the same. The candidate feels very uncomfortable in the moment.
Does this have anything to do with the environment that they're in, or are we talking just on a personal level?
It can be the environment, but I think today what we can talk about is the interpersonal rapport or lack of rapport, if you will, between the interviewer and the candidate.
I know that you break these down into certain categories, and the first of which is the cold fish. What's a cold fish?
The cold fish. We've all been in front of the cold fish at some point or another. Let me back up just a moment and say that let's assume a level playing field going into this discussion, that it's a given that the candidate has done their homework on the company, the job, the industry, and the people, so that you're prepared when you go into this situation. But you encounter one of these prototypical personalities, then what do you do? So the first one, as you said, that we can talk about is the cold fish. And this is the individual who is very cool, sometimes even feels cold to you, can be very stiff and formal. It feels like it would be impossible to warm this person up, that they are just sort of unresponsive to you. And they can be asking questions that are extremely superficial and not very engaging. You're just not getting anything from them at all. And this person might be either the hiring manager or it could be a screener. All of these prototypes that we're talking about could be one or the other. Either a screener, which might be in human resources, or it could be the hiring manager. And by the way, this can you can identify this whether you're in person or on the phone, if someone's being very cool and stiff and formal.
That was a question I was going to have, because I know that we do a lot of phone interviews these days. I would have thought that the cold fish you would have just known from the handshake, from the eye contact. But over the phone, you're not going to get any of that.
But tone of voice is, but we don't realize how much nonverbal communication we deal with, even when it's on the phone. You can tell a lot by tone of voice. You can hear someone smile by their tone of voice. And if they're not smiling, you can hear that too.
Does it have anything to do with the questions themselves? You said some are superficial questions.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes it feels like this person, the cold fish, is just going very much by the book, and they're just ticking down their list of questions. It's important with the cold fish, if you identify that you're in this kind of a situation, not to take it personally. This person might be sort of cool by nature in the first part of an interaction with someone, or they might have been trained to interview this way. You just don't know. So it's important to not take it personally, and it could be situational. They might just be having a bad day.
And a lot of cases, I would imagine, especially with the recruiter as opposed to the hiring manager, they're just trying to get through this and on to the next one.
Exactly. It's not about you, and that really is the most important thing to remember in all of these difficult personalities, is it's not about you, and your immediate goal in these situations is always get to the next meeting. I need to build enough rapport or enough connection to get to the second meeting or the next level in the interview process.
So regardless of the questions being superficial or not, you just answer the questions.
Absolutely. Be very aware of the cues that you are getting, if any, from that person. Try to match their level of communication. Don't over-communicate. Don't go overboard in trying to warm them up. Just work with them at their level. Give them exactly what they're asking for and work with them.
Could this be a reflection of the culture of that company?
It can. It certainly can. And you want to be alert for that too, because the interview, of course, always is an opportunity for you to take in as much information as possible. Presumably, as I said before, you're going in having done your homework, and you'll be prepared with a certain number of questions that you'll want to ask that person. So you're never going to interrupt their flow or get in the way of what they're trying to do with you. But whenever you can, with the cold fish, you're going to be trying to introduce as many of those questions as you can to make it more conversational.
Because as in all interviews, it is a two-way street.
Exactly.
So you need to go out of that interview with as much information as you can also to make your decision.
Yes. Okay. Sometimes the cold fish can be someone who is very concerned about procedure, process. They're a very operationally driven person, it can be. So you're going to want to remain alert for the cues that they're giving you about what they need to complete their process. So you can ask questions about what they need in their process. You can ask them to reflect what it is that you're giving to them. You can ask them literally, is this helpful, what I'm sharing with you? Is there a different type of information that you would like to have? Is there anything that you're not hearing that I could go into in more depth?
Fantastic.
New Landings Job Chat will be back right after a word from our sponsors.
Hello, my name is William Easley, Managing Director of Wealth Management with Prosperity Advisory Group. While under unemployment stress, there may be a temptation to become more conservative with your investment allocation. Recognizing how short-term problems can adversely influence your thinking about long-term goals can help you avoid costly mistakes. It's reasonable to expect that you may need cash and more liquid assets at your disposal as you assess your financial situation over a job loss. However, you must avoid selling long-term investments as a panic response to uncertainty. You may trigger an unwanted tax or generate an ill-timed loss. Conversely, being unemployed isn't the time to take a flyer on a hot stock tip, ratcheting up your risk level in hopes of a quick profit to make up for lost income. You may do nothing more than compound your cash flow problem. A reasoned and balanced approach is recommended. Start by seeking out a qualified financial planner, such as a CFP professional, who can help you assess your unemployment situation, suggest strategies for conserving wealth, and perhaps help you with ideas on how to best protect assets. It's important to sort out alternatives while structuring a plan around your short-term objectives and your long-term goals. Again, I'm William Easley with Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future.
That's the cold fish. Then we move on to the Jaded Skeptic.
The Jaded Skeptic. And let me interject one thing, too. With all of these difficult personalities, it's really helpful to send an immediate thank you note, because you can have some question about whether or not you built any kind of rapport for this person. It's not uncommon in leaving an interview with a difficult interviewer to think, I have no idea what that person thought of me. I have no idea if I did a good job, a bad job, or somewhere in between. So an immediate thank you note can do everything possible to underscore whatever rapport that you did build.
Handwritten?
You know, with the difficult interviewer, I would say both handwritten and email. It really can go a long way toward building that bridge if you're just not sure.
Fantastic.
So the Jaded Skeptic, you brought up the Jaded Skeptic. This is the person who appears to be very doubtful about why they might be interviewing you in the first place, or just not sure. They're kind of giving you cues that they're really not sure about your fit for that particular role. This could be a person who has perhaps been burned before in selecting a person for that job. They may have the bar set particularly high for one reason or another. They may be answering to someone else's agenda. They may just not be pre-sold on your candidacy, or there may be another candidate that is sort of pre-approved for this position. And so you're sort of getting the brunt of that person's skepticism.
So it could, like you say, be a case where they were told to interview you. It wasn't their choice.
That could be, or there could be a lot of stressors that are entering into that hiring manager or screener's life right at that particular moment, and it could be simply another bad day situation. They're just having a bad day.
So what's the best way to handle that?
The Jaded Skeptic is best built rapport with by conversation and dialogue. So your prepared questions are going to go a long way with the Jaded Skeptic, and you're going to want to focus your questions on what works for them, what's going to be the best fit for them in filling this job. So you're going to want to ask questions about what do you think are the most important qualifications for this job, what's your biggest concern in filling this position, what's the most important thing you want this person to do in the first 90 days, what do you need to know about me to give you confidence moving forward. Those kinds of questions are what can build bridges with the skeptic.
Like you said, it could have been somebody had been burnt before in a previous hire. Mm-hmm. So you want to make them as comfortable as they can be that
Exactly.
you are the person for the job.
Make it about them. Your questions are going to allow the hiring manager or the screener to get more information about you, but your questions should always be focused on them, what's going to make it best for them.
Okay. Seems to be way different than the first one.
A little bit. I mean, these are all, these prototypes are all kind of on a spectrum, mm-hmm. if you will. But they all have a commonality of trying to meet the interviewer where they are and building some kind of connection.
I've always heard that it's good to mirror the interviewer. Mm-hmm. In these cases, is that a good idea?
It is. It is. And tone of voice, body language, posture can be big parts of this. Even when you're on the phone, as we talked about, tone of voice, pace of communication. If you're with a fast talker, notice that, be aware of that, and pick up the pace of your speech to try to match that person. Likewise, if they tend to be a slow talker or have a lot of pauses, you might be with a very thoughtful person. So slow down to meet their pace.
Fantastic. Let's move on to a third one.
Okay.
And this one, the title itself intrigues me. The Nosy Detective.
The Nosy Detective. And this especially can be either a screener, an initial screener, or a hiring manager. And this person, you very much get the feeling that they are absolutely on a mission to uncover every single thing in every corner, under every little piece of your background, and even sometimes your life, that they're going to delve into it and want to know why you did this and how that happened and why this gap.
Why are they doing that?
Their motives can be different in every single case. Sometimes you'll find a person who's been trained to interview this way. Sometimes if it's a screener, they are simply trying to check off all of the boxes that their organization is requiring of them. In the case of a hiring manager, just like with the Jaded Skeptic, you might encounter someone who's been burned before, who may not have done their due diligence in uncovering all of the candidates' past, and so that can come into play.
When you say checking off the boxes, the cold fish is doing that also, but this seems to be at a much deeper level.
The questions from the Nosy Detective can feel much more intrusive, when in some cases really all they're doing is their due diligence, and the questions feel uncomfortable to you because they might deal with something that's very far in the past, or they might deal with something that happens to be the one thing that you really don't want to talk about. So the key here in being ready for the Nosy Detective is preparation, and being prepared in a very smooth and polished fashion to handle all questions about your background.
What if the Nosy Detective starts to ask questions that you feel are too intrusive or too personal? Mm-hmm. Do you push back on that?
You can, and that's another one of the prototypes that we'll talk about just a little bit later, which is the inappropriate legal nightmare, because sometimes people can get into areas that they're not supposed to. But if they're simply being intrusive, you can push back a little bit by responding to the issue that you think they might be asking about. So, for example, if they're asking about your marital status or whether you have children, you can respond. Presumably, the issue is availability to do work at all times, or perhaps to travel. And so you can respond by saying, if you're asking about my availability for work or travel, I can assure you that I'm accustomed to being in high demand situations, being available around the clock and available to travel whenever needed. So you can deflect giving the personal information, but address the issue that you suppose that they're getting at. The most common ways that the Nosy Detective will make an interviewee uncomfortable is with questions about the job history, either having to do with layoffs, with terminations, or with gaps. And the key there is to be prepared. It can also be a little bit of a psychological leverage to complement their thoroughness, especially with the screener. That the interviewer enjoys being complimented every once in a while on the job that they're doing.
It would seem to me that, again, if we're looking at the culture of the company, this might lead to a company that is a lot more detailed than some other company might be.
It can be. Again, sometimes the screener will just have been trained to interview in this way, and you're just trying to be alert for what are the cues that you're really being given. Are they trying to get some particular kind of information? Or if this happens in more than one interview or with more than one person in that organization, that might be able to tell you something about the culture and how these people really go about their business.
Do you find you'll get more behavioral questions from someone like this than you would from the cold fish?
Not necessarily. The Nosy Detective is usually someone who is really preoccupied with background. So again, the key is preparation. You want to have full disclosure. You want to share as much information as they're really looking for that will be necessary for them to do their due diligence, but obviously not allow them to be intrusive. If you feel you need to push back, do it on the basis of what's required for the job.
In any of these situations, with any of these that we're discussing, does gender come into play at any time, or is it just the way the person has been taught?
Well, that's an interesting question, because certainly gender does come into play in some interactions. So does age, so does educational background. There can be all kinds of barriers between two interviewers. The job of the candidate is to attempt to build that bridge in whatever way possible. You're going to try to do it not necessarily on the basis of personal issues, as you might in an ordinary networking situation, but rather on the basis of the job. And sometimes it can be disarming for the candidate to simply ask the interviewer what type of an experience they're having in interviewing for this position.
You're trying to get to a position or a place where you're comfortable with what is happening.
Yes.
And trying to turn that difficult situation into something that you can live with.
The goal is always dialogue and conversation, because at the end of the day, Hector, we all know that the hiring manager's decision is not necessarily that they hire the person who is best qualified for the job. They hire the person they like the best. It's just the way the world works.
Well, we've discussed 3 of these situations or these types. There are more, and we can get to those in our next podcast. But for now, I hope that this wasn't too difficult a situation for you.
You were a lovely interviewer, Hector.
Well,
thank you for having me.
We thank you for being here.
Thanks.
And if someone wanted to get more information or contact you further, where could they reach you?
You can reach me through my company website at www.LandaJobNow.com, or you can Google me, Kathryn Lorenzen.
Fantastic. We're not finished with Kathryn. Like you said, there are still more of these types that we have to go through. So make sure that you pick up on this with our next podcast. And remember that this and all other podcasts can be found on our website, www.newlandingsjobchat.org. And just click on the Past Chats button and you can see all of the different interviews that we have done. As always, may your days be full of health, happiness, and success.